Thank you so much for attending our 15th year Martin Luther King breakfast. My name is Linda White, and I am co-chair for this event. It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce my friend, Marsha Barnhart, as this year's Mistress of Ceremony for this event. Marsha has worked as anchor and co-anchor in the California area and the Ohio area. Since 1988, she has been here in Dayton, Ohio, at WDTN Channel 2. Her most recent assignment has been as co-chair of the 5:30 News. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Marsha Barnhart.
Thank you, Linda. And good morning, everyone. Beautiful day, sold out crowd here. This is wonderful and truly an honor and a testimony to why we're here today. Someone asked me this morning if I had seen the movie Selma, which depicts Bloody Sunday, March 7th, 1965. I have not yet seen it. I probably will see it today, actually. But when I thought about it, I remember it. March 7th, in March of 1965, I was an 8th grader in Toledo, Ohio, and just watching the news and knowing what was going on, reading the newspaper and not understanding why. I know what I read, I know what I was told, but I still didn't get it. And sometimes I think still now, I still don't get it. You know, just the why. That's the most difficult. Well, this morning, we are going to have a grand opportunity to meet a gentleman who lived in Selma, still lives in Selma, who has certainly a great perspective to offer all of us here today about the events and just life in that city in general. Before we speak with James Perkins, before we hear Mr. Perkins speak, we're going to speak with and listen to Mayor Mark Kingseed, the mayor of Centerville.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you here to Yankee Trace, to the 15th annual celebration of Martin Luther King Day. I especially want to give thanks to the members of the Diversity Committee who always do such a great job in organizing this event. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we meet on this day every year to pay tribute to a great man, a man who dedicated his life to equality and to justice, and a man who died as a martyr to these causes. It's very important to remember Dr. King, the man, because studying the lives of great historic figures teaches us about character, about commitment, and about the great things that one person can accomplish. His struggle should inspire all of us to show courage in the face of danger, perseverance in the face of oppression, and teach us to stand up for freedom, even when it is difficult to do so. But this day, I think, is much more than a celebration of one man or one man's life. I think Martin Luther King Day should be a day for every American to reflect upon fundamental principles, to reflect upon what makes America different and special, and to reflect and to think about the obligations that we have to each other as American citizens. Because we are a nation, as Lincoln put it, conceived in liberty and founded on a proposition that all men are created equal. We all know that that proposition was first articulated in the Declaration of Independence in 1776. But of course, we also know that the promise of equality is not and has never been self-executing. We all know that when originally made, the promise, in fact, applied to a very small subset of Americans. And we all know that all of our history for the last 240 years has been a fight to make that promise of equality more real for more and more of our citizens. Because the promise of equality created a standard against which the government could be judged. But I think equally important, it created an obligation for each person who calls himself or herself an American. Because the promise of equality becomes real only when ordinary citizens, like all of us, insist that it becomes real. In the last speech he made, the night before he was murdered, Dr. King talked about having been to the mountaintop and about having seen the promised land. The promised land of which he spoke was a land where everyone has an equal opportunity to excel, as far as their God-given talents will allow. It is a place where everyone would be judged, in Dr. King's words, by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a great country, and we have made enormous strides. But if we are true to ourselves, we know that we have not yet arrived at the promised land. It is a dream, it is a goal, it lies in front of us, it beckons us, and our children and our grandchildren. But each of us in our own lives, in what we do and what we say, in the policies that we support, in the policies that we insist the government adopt, in the way that we treat our fellow citizens, we can all bring the promised land closer to fulfillment for the entire American family. We cannot, consistent with our duty as citizens, passively acquiesce in injustice, unfairness, or oppression. So my friends, let us use this day to honor the memory of Dr. King, the man. Let us use this day to take inspiration from his courage and from his life. And let us rededicate ourselves to the principles upon which this nation was founded. And let us remember more than anything else that amongst Americans, there is no us versus them, but only one family, all of us together, equal and united, working towards a common goal. Thank you very much.
We will also hear from Dale Berry, who is the Washington Township Trustee President.
Good morning. On behalf of Washington Township trustees, Scott Paulson, Joyce Young, our administrator, Jesse Lytle, I would like to welcome you to this wonderful event. Also, I'd like to acknowledge this morning that sitting at our table is our newly elected state representative, Niraj Antani, joining us this morning as well. So we're pleased to have him with us. I'm honored to be invited to this annual event to honor the life and accomplishments of Dr. Martin Luther King. I'd like to thank the Centerville-Washington Diversity Council, not only for sponsoring this annual event, but for all that they do all year long. Before preparing my very brief comments, I decided to find out a little bit about our guest speaker this morning, James Perkins Jr. When I learned where he was in March of 1965, I, like Marcia, decided to think about where I was in March of 1965. I was a junior at Miami University and was anxiously looking forward to April when I'd reached the age, which was 21 in those days, where I could vote. So I didn't have to participate in any marches or be subject to any attacks. I just went down and registered to vote. My situation was in sharp contrast to what Mr. Perkins was experiences in 1965. I don't know if it's all entirely possible for most of us to entirely wrap our minds around that, but it's very important that we try. Because unless we've been on a bridge at 12 years of age where people are being beaten for pursuing what most of us knew as a basic American right, then there just might be a lot that we don't really understand. In other words, you don't need to hear any more from me this morning. It's time for me just to sit down so you can hear from our speaker, Mr. Perkins.
This occasion certainly brings memories to all of us. Where were we all? We all think, where were we when President Kennedy was assassinated? Where were we when major historical events occurred? And as Mr. Berry was just discussing, he was just going to vote. You're just going to register to vote, and how for him it was just something that you did at that time when you turned 21, and just how difficult it was, and what a major issue that it was for people of color in the South to register to just cast a ballot. The activity, the incidents, the horrific situation that happened as they marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge a few times in 1965 led to the creation and the passage of the Voting Rights Act. But Mr. Perkins says something very interesting about that. He says that to him, the 1965 Voting Rights Act is equal to, if not for that, is equal to 2014 and voter apathy. And I'm pretty sure he's going to explain that to us. He said, because the past often visits the present. And he says, actually, the message is what actually transcends race, and that it is not always about race, that there are other variables that are involved in what we're going through right now. But I'm not going to discuss what he's going to discuss with you. But I do want to mention that his book, his most recently published book, is Same-Sex Marriage: The Issue Is Not the Problem. So we, as you know, that book is here for all of you to take a look at and hopefully buy. How about that? I was also watching a part of Oprah's event last night, the Legends of the Civil Rights Movement, and she saluted folks that include John Lewis, Myrlie Evers Williams, Julian Bond, the widow of Ralph Abernathy, Reverend C.T. Vivian, and a number of other people whom she said were certainly critical in creating the civil rights movement and helping us get to where we are today. Mr. Perkins, however, was a little boy at that time during that March 7th incident on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and since then he has become the mayor of Selma. And it appears as though my math tells me 8 years, so he was elected twice, so he knew what he was doing, obviously. But just to think, if we all just sit and think, years later, he would not have been the mayor of Selma without what happened on Bloody Sunday. We're sure of that. So without further ado, Mr. James Perkins, Jr.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
In the southern vernacular, y'all doing all right? It's good to be here. I'm just thankful to be here. I want to acknowledge the host committee, the Centerville-Washington Diversity Council. And I want to acknowledge in his absence John Gretz and his family in Montgomery. Also, I need to acknowledge Kara because she had the responsibility to facilitate me getting here and my departure from here. And so I must acknowledge her tenacity. To the president of this organization, Georgia, and her husband and children and the dog that picked me up last night at the airport. I want to thank them for waiting. The plane was a little delayed, but anytime it goes up and down safely, it's a good flight. And to all of the participants on the program this morning, especially I acknowledge Mayor Kingsley. Thank you so much for your comments, very kind and very on point. I stand with you in your monologue. And to the trustee president and the members of the trustees who are present. And I will tell you, President Barry, that I have been called a lot worse than Dr. Perkins. The state representative who's present. And let me get this off the table now. You can ask me anything you want, just don't ask me about the Alabama-Ohio State game. Are we clear? I also want to recognize a good friend. We served as entrepreneurs together. He and his wife are here, Ray Minor and his wife. I want to acknowledge him because we started out together many years ago in business, and he finds himself now as the program officer at the Kettering Foundation. Just wanted to acknowledge his presence and their presence and the foundation's presence. It's just good to be here and to see you, my friend. And finally, I need to say that I am a life member of the NAACP, and I know that the president was here. I'm not sure if Mr. Forward is here. He was left and planned to come back. But when he comes back, somebody tell him that I called him by name. Would you do that? Let him know that I express my appreciation for the NAACP's participation in voter registration, voter identification, and GOTV efforts during all of my elections. I just want to say that for the public record. I want to thank you for the blessing and just the opportunity to be here. I take invitations very important. I take them very seriously. I think they're very important. I am here by invitation, and I really value invitations. I'd rather be asked up by invitation than asked down by nullification, and so, again, I thank you. Before I get started, I need to put my comments in proper context. I acknowledge that everything I say has either been etched on the wall of a cave or written upon a scroll. It has either been typed on a sheet of paper or affixed on electronic media. It has either been recited as a poem or sang as a song or preached from a pulpit. I'm certain that at some point it has been discussed at a bar. It's been transmitted by ground mail, air mail, and email, whispered from a pillow or shouted from a mountain. I am convinced that nothing that I say will be unique. There are instances when I know who said first what I am about to say, and in those instances I give them credit for their profundity. But in other instances, I'm not aware of who said it, when they said it, or upon the conditions it was said. But collectively and uniformly, I give credit for whatever was said, whenever it was said, and to whomever said it. Now, I'm sure that does not silence the critics, but it amuses the attorneys. Additionally, please allow me to acknowledge that I am a very spiritual person. I recognize that this event is designed as a multicultural, multiracial, ecumenical audience. I will not attempt to sway your spirituality, at least not this time. But since I am here as your invited guest, and I was instructed to talk about me, I pray that you will give me an uncensored opportunity to exercise my right to speak about all of me. me politically, me philosophically, and me spiritually, if I choose to do that. Now, know that my comments are not intended to offend anyone, but they are provided to explain who I am. Finally, I must say, talking about me is one of the most uncomfortable things I do because people are interested in my story, and I have shared my story a few times before. I've gotten a little better at it, yet I am not comfortable speaking about James Perkins. But today, this is my charge, and this is what Kara insists that I do. And because of her insistence, you will hear a full dose of me. If you're disappointed about what you hear, blame her. And so here we are once again at this appointed time, a time when we are encouraged to remember and to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And this year, as prior years, we are called into service. We are called to action. We are called to make this a day on and not a day off. This holiday is not one of those when we are encouraged to eat, drink, and be merry. It is a day to serve those with the least of peace, those with lost hope, to serve those whom have not yet realized the Constitution's preamble, for it really is a sad reality that in this day and time, the words we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal with certain inalienable, certain unchallengeable, certain absolute and non-controvertible, certain undisputable and undeniable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is a sad reality that these words yet remain fiction in the lives of some citizens in this country. Interesting enough, the cornerstone of our nation's legal foundation, the Constitution, can be traced back to my spiritual canon, the Bible. Yes, Dr. King, in his own way, relied upon Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent civil disobedience strategy. And that strategy found its way into Selma, Alabama. And the Selma movement inspired movements in Tiananmen Square and in South Africa. But whether you accept it or not, whether we understand it or not, it was the Bible that served as the foundation document for the 1960s movement. Dr. King often relied upon and shared his vision of hope and possibilities through words from the Bible. When he spoke the words, "Let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream," and Dr. King was quoting Amos when he said, "Let judgment run down as water and righteousness like a mighty stream." King's words were as a double-edged machete, piercing the conscience and cutting the very soul of America. And as the words rolled from his lips, they literally punched holes in the conscience of a fear-stricken society of oppressors and the oppressed alike. Dr. King told the oppressing American majority, "Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. The words reminded the oppressing American majority that it was, in fact, enslaved itself by the comforts and privileges obtained through segregated and biased systems. The words reminded the oppressing American majority that it was enslaved by its own fears of an unrevealed and misunderstood future that was pregnant with the promise of racial justice and universal social brotherhood. Dr. King's words went on to force the oppressed American minority, black folks, to face the cruel realities of our pathetic living conditions. For it was a true reality check for the Negro to be confronted with these words. But 100 years later, we must face the tragic fact that the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, he said, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself an exile in his own land. So we have come here today, he said, to dramatize an appalling condition. On that day, standing at the Lincoln Monument in Washington, D.C., both the oppressed and the oppressor met with the uncensored challenges of some very undeniable truths. Be reminded that Dr. King was very concerned about how the American Negro would ultimately react to the trials and tribulations of long-term systemic oppression. He expressed this concern by stating this, but there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. As a leader of a beaten down people, Dr. King, he really had to be concerned about how black people would respond to freedom. He had to be concerned about the state of mind of the American Negro. Would being treated with bitterness cause the Negro to act out of bitterness? Would the sting of hatred cause the American minority to denigrate to a hateful heart? When the oppressed minority overcome the degrading and dehumanizing tactics of an oppressing majority and emerge from this horrendous struggle as a truly blessed people, would the American Negro transform from the status of oppressed only to become an oppressor? By reflecting on these words, we get a glimpse into the prophetic concerns and the prophetic realities of King and the sometimes shocking conditions of interracial human discourse. Many have heard Dr. King's dreams. Many of us have heard them. We listen to them all the time. There are just as many understandings of his message as there are cultures, as there are moods, lifestyles, and value systems. But my understanding of his message is anchored in my childhood experiences. For it was as a child that I first became sensitive, that I first heard this message. As a child, I listened through the anger of Jim Crow oppression. It was through feelings of fear and feelings of hate, through feelings of bitterness and envy, that I heard this man talking about this dream. I have a dream that one day the state of Alabama, he said this, whose governor's lips are presently dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, will be transformed into a situation where little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls and walk together as sisters and brothers. Dr. King's vision was a simple vision. That vision was that one day people would just treat one another right, that we would measure our relationships one with another, communicate one with another through spiritual reconciliation, that we would en masse treat one another based on character, not color, that we would treat one another based on spirit and not religion, and that we would treat one another based on personality and not gender or race. It matters not what the dividing line is, and there are many of them: race, class, color of skin, religion, sex. One day we will see each other soul to soul and not skin to skin. It is for this hope that I find the stamina to speak of myself. For most of my life, I have chased this dream with the hope of actually seeing it for myself. In fact, looking back over my life, I see so many things common about Dr. King and my personal experiences. He was born on January 15th. I was born on January 16th. He was a Southern preacher, and I am a Southern preacher. He had a special relationship with Dr. F.D. Reese. I have a special relationship with Dr. F.D. Reese. He found the love of his life, Coretta, in Marion, Alabama, where Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot. I found the love of my life 30 miles from there, Cynthia, in Selma, where Jimmy Lee Jackson died. While standing in the presence of my mother at the Good Samaritan Hospital, Dr. King held my baby sister in his arms. I did the same standing in that same hospital. I held my baby sister in the presence of my mother and the Sisters of St. Joseph in my arms. From his loins came 4 children, and from mine 4 children. His mother encouraged him to sing in the church choir, as did my mother encourage me to sing in the church choir. I can go on and on about these peculiar parallels. For whatever reason, I'm the one here standing today to share this story. I live in a region of our nation referred to as the Black Belt. More specifically, I live in the Black Belt of the Deep South. Even more specific than that, Selma Alabama, is known as the Queen City of the Black Belt. Her name means high seat. You do know that where you live significantly contributes to our perception of things and our reality. It does not matter whether you want to accept or reject your upbringing. You know, where you grew up, it really does help shape how we structure our relationships with folks and how we treat each other. If you've never lived in my reality, if you've never lived in my Selma, and you hear my comments without any background about my reality, about my Selma, it would be kind of difficult, if not even impossible, for you to understand the message that I'm about to share with you. It would be regretful that you got up this early in the morning, weathered the condition, paid to be here, and then not get the message. Just before I get, though, too deep into my personal experiences on Bloody Sunday, I need to tell you something about my Selma. I want you to consider the fact that we live in some interesting times. I want to put this thing in perspective for you. The existence of the internet and cable television have brought us closer together. You all do know that, don't you? And that the lines that separate us by distance have been blurred. We're closer together now. We see each other more often, and we see each other regular. And with the advent of these distance changes, we know a bit more about each other. Somebody ought to say amen to that. You see, I know that you did not have to travel to the deep south to find racism. Because of instant communication at the person level. You see, I can see your issues virtually at the same time your issues going on. I can see you. I can see what's happening in your corner of your life. I can see your issues virtually at the same time that they're happening. And it comes to me in Selma. It comes uncensored by news, and it is not censored by government filters. Literally, I see you, and I know that a lot of the same issues that we dealt with in 1965 in Selma, y'all better hear what I'm saying to you, exist right here in the Midwest, in the heart of America, not just then, but today as well. I know this. Why would you insult the folk this way, Perkins? Well, because, see, when I tell you some raw truths about Selma, I don't want you to get this thing twisted. I don't want you to think that that's just a Selma thing. I need us to understand that this is an American. In fact, no, it is a human condition that we are addressing. But in a deeper and real sense, if you do not live in my neighborhood, if you do not attend my church, if you do not eat at my dinner table, truth be told, you really don't know me. And I don't really know you. Why is that so, Perkins? Well, because, see, what you see when we dress up and come outside is not always what's really going on. My great-grandmama used to say, heap sees, but few knows. And so as grandmama said, I think that's real. Today, I'm going to pull the curtain back and kind of clue you in on my community, both past and present. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, past and present, and my perceptions of our future. But I must warn you, unless you are prepared to take my historical reality and somehow plug it into your present-day future, then the information I share with you today will be useless. Your attendance will be useless. And this morning will literally be a waste of our time. My life began as a Jim Crow resident. My journey has been a painful blessing. You see, I was born in 1953, just 1 year before the Supreme Court declared racial segregation in public education as unconstitutional. Yet, it was not until 1970, 17 years later,
that my entire childhood, my senior year in high school, that I was able to attend a fully integrated public school system. Change is slow. In 1955, Rosa Parks sat on a bus to advance public accommodations. But it was not until 1966, 11 years later, that I was able to sit down in a local restaurant in my town. That change was slow. The Voting Rights Act was signed in 1965, yet it was not until 1972, 7 years later, after black people were elected to the Selma City Council. Reese, Doyle, Hunter, Kemp, and Kimbrell were elected to the city council. It was only until then that the streets that I lived in, the neighborhood that I lived in, got paved streets and indoor toilets. And the movement in Selma for the right to vote started long before Bloody Sunday, y'all. Long before King's arrival into Selma. The officers of the Dallas County Voters League, affectionately known as the Courageous Eight, Ernest Doyle, Henry Shannon, James Gildersleeve, Amelia Boynton, Marie Foster, F.D. Reese, Ulysses Blackman, and J.D. Hunter led the voting rights movement before SNCC, before the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and before SCLC entered into Selma. I have personal relationships with every last one of those men and women of the Courageous Eight. I knew them all. Only two remain with us today, Amelia Boynton Robinson and F.D. Reese. Bloody Sunday, Turnaround Tuesday, and the successful Selma to Montgomery March were nothing but the climax events that led to the signing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the local leaders of that movement was the man who is now the pastor of my church, Dr. Reese. I will tell you that on the day of the successful march, he walked the first leg, went back to Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church, and accepted his pastoral call of that church. And today, this year, we will celebrate his 50th pastoral anniversary at Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church. That's a little true history. I'm gonna get you past the movie here today. How do you know that, Perkins? Well, because I know him personally, and because I was there when it happened. Sunday, March 7th of 1965, Selma. It started out as a normal day for my family. One telephone call changed all of that. We were actually sitting at the dinner table, my family and me, and that day of all days, Mom and Dad said that we were not going to march. I couldn't go. I really wanted to go because by the age of 12, many of the young people in my community, we were seasoned protesters, had participated in many of the marches. And so I knew that my classmates and friends were going to be there, and I wanted to be there too. That day I cried because it was that day of all days I really wanted to participate in that march. And while at the dinner table, the phone rang. It was a neighbor who lives down the street. Her name, Miss Petway. She's gone on to glory now. But she told my mom about the violence taking place on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And at that moment, everything normal about that day changed. Mom insisted on going to the hospital to help. You see, my mom was on maternity leave. She had just given birth to my baby sister, the one I mentioned that Dr. King held. Why did he hold her, Perkins? Well, because she was born on January 15th, his birthday. And he wanted to see the little child that was born on his birthday. And so Mom went to the emergency room. My dad drove her there at the Good Samaritan Hospital. And when she arrived at the hospital, the emergency room was filled with tear-gassed, beaten, and bloodied people. Mom said that the hospital was fully staffed, and she did not stay there. She went on to the colored-owned Burwell Infirmary, a small black-owned hospital across from Selma University. And it was there she treated patients who were lying on the floor, in the hallways, on the porch, and wherever they landed. And when Dad and Mom left home, I defied their instructions, and I left home running. The distance from my home to Brown Chapel Church is about 1.5 miles. Well, Perkins, what about now? It's still about 1.5 miles because I live about 3 blocks from where I grew up. And I ran the entire distance. Today I'd have to walk it. But that day I ran it. And when I arrived in GWC Homes, George Washington Carver Homes, the projects, I ran into white men riding horses, riding through the neighborhood, chasing people with these long sticks. I later found out that those sticks were cattle prods and billy clubs. I ran into somebody's house. I don't know who she was, but she let me in. I waited there until the coast was clear. And then I made a mad dash to the church. And when I arrived at the church, what I witnessed, I remember. I remember the odor of the tear gas that was in the clothes and the hair of the people as they returned from that bridge. I remember the traumatized and anger looks in their faces. That day reaffirmed Selma as ground zero for the rights of people of color in America. It was that day another generation of Selmians were defined and had to assume the responsibility of armor bearer for the equity and opportunity movement in America. That day reaffirmed America as we were yet falling short of our preamble and our Constitution. How do you know, Perkins? Well, because I was there and I cried. It still hurts. That day started as a normal day for me. Sitting at my kitchen table. And it ended with these horrifying images that are burned into my memory forever. But you know, they're also burned into the American's conscience. Because, see, we still have to remember what happened that day. The success of that movement in Selma needed children to start that fire. It was children that started the marches in Selma. We needed the Courageous Eight, whose chairman was Dr. Reese. We needed SNCC to come. We needed John Lewis to be there. We needed SCLC. We needed them to come for Turnaround Tuesday. We needed James Orange and Hosea Williams and Andy Young. We needed Bernard Lafayette. We needed all of them. C.T. Vivian, we needed them to show up. We needed Lyndon Baines Johnson. And whether many want to acknowledge it or not, we needed George Wallace. And we needed Jim Clark. Everybody was needed to transform this country. And the tragic reality is that Jimmy Lee Jackson had to die. He had to be killed by Trooper Fowley. Then, if he had not, then Reverend James Bevel would not have concocted the notion of marching from Marion, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama to carry his coffin and put it on the governor's steps. That was the initial thought of this march. Somebody talked some sense into Bevel. So you can't take the man's coffin to the governor's steps, man. And then from there emerged the march from Selma to Montgomery. The tragic reality is that Unitarian clergy, Reverend James Reeve and his colleagues, if they had not decided to eat at the colored restaurant Walker's Cafe, if they had not decided to walk out of that establishment and walk past the all-white establishment, the Silver Moon Cafe, on Washington Street in Selma, Alabama, he would not have taken what John Lewis described as a full-swing baseball bat licked to his skull that ultimately took his life. The tragic reality of Viola Liuzzo. She had to come to Selma. She had to come to Selma. She had to come looking for ways to help us. She didn't know me. She did not know my name. But she came for me. But if she had not taken a bullet on Highway 80 while providing transportation for people who had walked to Montgomery, they needed to get back to Selma. If she had not decided to do that, she would be alive today. She gave her life for me. I take these deaths personally. I take them to heart. For all of this had to happen in order for James Perkins Jr. to become mayor of Selma. They had to happen. In order for Doug Wilder to rise to governor of Virginia, it had to happen. In order for Cory Booker to be sitting in the United States Senate, it had to happen. In order for Barack Obama to be the president of these United States, it had to happen. All of this had to happen, and for whatever reason, the ground zero is Selma. Why Selma? I just don't know. I don't know. Why me? I don't know. All I know is that my paternal grandmother marched from Selma to Montgomery. And even though my granddaddy didn't want her sleeping on the ground, and he would drive to the campsite and take her home to sleep in her bed and take her back to complete the march. I don't know why they did that, but that was my family. My mom, a nurse by profession, worked with Dr. Reese, courageously signed letters and addressed them to physicians that she was working with, encouraging them to desegregate their office, assisted hundreds to register to vote, and participated in the voting rights movement. That's my family. And my dad, a teacher, marched in the Teachers' March, a political organizer, served as a campaign manager for Reese and for Dan Rutledge, for council members, and served as my campaign manager. That's my father. Sunithia, my sister, who was held in the arms of Dr. King, became the first African-American female to serve as the Dallas County Board of Registrars, political organizer, married now to Circuit Judge Collins Pettaway Jr. That's my family. My niece, Vernetta Perkins, who recently posted this message on Facebook. Y'all know what that is, don't you? Let me tell you what she wrote about her experiences while watching the movie Selma. She posted this. What also freaked me out was that Jimmy Lee Jackson scene. I've gone over that murder so many times in my head while working on the case with my former boss, Selma District Attorney Michael Jackson, to prosecute Trooper Fowley. That's the man that shot Jimmy Lee Jackson. My niece was the prosecuting attorney. Trooper who shot Jimmy Lee, she posted, "I'm proud." She said, "I poured through investigative reports, local, state, FBI, looked at his autopsy report, witness statements, including his mother's, all to piece the events together in the anticipation of a possible trial in Perry County." She ended that post by saying that depicted on film was nuts. Rich heritage. That's my family. See, we know that Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot in Marion, and he died in Good Samaritan, where my mother was nurse. And we know that his killer was prosecuted by my niece. That's my family. And now we celebrate 50 years. We commemorate 50 years later, and now there's this movie made, and while others celebrate the movement, we celebrate the influence that Selma's had on my life. I acknowledge without her, today I'd be in another place doing something else. Selma has been kind to the world, I tell you that. She's given much, and she has done more for the world than she has done for herself. And her kindness has not gone without punishment. For to this very day, Lord help me, Selma and her citizens remain battered and bruised by her history. Selma, my beloved Selma, contributed so much to what America is and to who I am. You see, that was not the first time that Selma was the ground zero, but she has been America's ground zero for racial debate and discourse. So I need you to understand that Selma, her significance is not symbolic. Selma is not some kind of example. It's not just a phase. Selma is not the representation of the African American experience. Selma is the total embodiment of the experiences of people in color in this country. And those of us who have engaged in not the battle of Selma, but the battles of Selma, we have become this special breed of landlords for civil and human rights in the world. Our experiences really have taught us the real difference between equity and equal, the difference between fairness and favoritism. We truly understand the difference between faith and fear. No other community can claim this, not so absolute as Selma can. And because this is so, I am convinced, I am absolutely convinced that Selma will be the embodiment of the reconciliation within this nation. I don't know when and I don't know how, but I am convinced that reconciliation will be birthed in this country in Selma, Alabama. Know that the last, you need to understand something. See, the last significant battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Selma, the battle where General Nathan Bedford Forrest, the man who is accredited with introducing military and terrorism tactics into the KKK, that battle was in Selma, Alabama. April of 1865, in Selma, Alabama. The Navy munitions plant for the Confederate Army was in Selma, Alabama. That's what needed to be taken. Know that a black man named Benjamin Sterling Turner came up from slavery in 1865 and just 5 years later was elected to the United States Congress. 1870, where in Selma, Alabama. Turner is buried in Selma, Alabama. Know that the St. James Hotel still stands in Selma. Well, why is that important, Perkins? Well, it's important because Turner, his slave master, went off to fight in the Civil War. I'm telling you, I'm just trying to help somebody here. And when he went off to fight in the Civil War, he assigned some of the management responsibilities for his hotel to his slave. Turner. Know that when General Wilson and his troops invaded Selma, they burned the town down. The only block that remained is the one that the St. James Hotel stands now. Why did that one remain? Because he needed a place for his headquarters. And that's where he and his troops stayed when they invaded Selma. I'm glad they did. Amen, somebody. Know that the League of the South, which is the successor of the White Citizens Council, which is the successor of the KKK, feels it must succeed in Selma. They feel that way to this very day. And even in this day, the battle rages in Selma over forest monuments, Confederate markers, and Black Lives Matter. Today, knowing this about Selma kind of helps you to understand why Bill Clinton, John McCain, and John Edwards, and Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton, and the list goes on, all felt it necessary to set their feet on Selma's soil and take the pilgrimage across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Knowing this helps you to understand why the 2000 election that ushered me in as mayor of the city of Selma was covered by major periodicals on every continent in the world. Knowing this helps us to understand why the movie Selma is creating such an emotional stir and public dialogue. Selma does not just represent the struggle. To those who truly know and understand her, Selma is the ground zero of the African American struggle for equity and opportunity in America. And so I'm here, invited by you to connect the dots from Africa to a port of call in Mobile, with the connector being the Alabama River, traveling inward to a port of call in Selma. For it was on Water Avenue at that port where slaves were auctioned off. And it is the bridge named after a Confederate general, Edmund Pettus, that simultaneously serves as a symbol of the rights of people of color to vote. Isn't it interesting how that bridge, named after a Confederate general, serves as a symbol of hope for the same people he was determined to oppress? As Dr. King reminded us in the rhetorical question asked during his speech, how long? In the call and response style of the Negro hymn, the reply, not long. And so in the spirit of King, I ask, how long will we allow the heritage of segregation and tradition, of racism, to drag us as a nation down into the ditch of despair? How long? I hope not long. How long will we allow greed and envy to deceive us into distrust and division, all among the human race, and lead us into destroying our own progress as a nation? How long? My prayer is not long. As a nation, we must renew the family, y'all better hear me, as our second priority. And we must make education and economic, political empowerment a focus for all of our people. But more than anything else, we must renew our covenant with God as a nation. See, if a nation will not keep its word with its God, then how in the world can we keep our word with each other? If the Bible means nothing, then that means the Constitution means absolutely nothing. I'm here just to remind us that history really is a great teacher. And when we know better, help me, Holy Ghost, We ought to do better. The moral code in the Bible is the foundation of democracy. That moral code presented 4,000 years ago came as 10 commands, later interpreted as 2, simply to put God first and just treat folk right. And when the family and the church, when communities and our nation drops that ball, when we lose focus on the moral code of conduct, we lose a piece of our civility. We literally, the further we move away, the more uncivilized we become. Reduce civility increases chaos and confusion, trouble on every hand. And so I just stopped by just to say, put God first, treat people right, and learn to love yourself for who you are. And just because you love yourself, that does not mean that you have to not love somebody that don't look like you, that don't talk like you, and don't live where you live. See, I believe, y'all better help me. I'm finna start preaching. I'll be back up in there. Let me back up. Let me start. It's okay. It's okay to love who you are. It really is. It's okay to love your heritage. It's okay. It's not okay to hate someone because they don't have your same heritage. That's not okay. I just don't know. But my feelings about me are simply summed up. I can sum them up in the letter that Reverend Pearlie wrote to his friend in the play Pearlie Victorious. I can pretty much sum it up that way. In that letter, he wrote these simple words. He said, "My friend, I find being black a thing of beauty, a joy, a peace, a secret cup of gladness, a native land in neither time nor place, a native land in every Negro's face. Be loyal to yourself, your hair, your skin, and your lips, your southern speech, and your laughing kindness. For a Negro's kingdom is vast as any other. Accept in full the sweetness of your blackness, neither wanting to be white or red or yellow or any other face or race, but this." And then he ended his letter, and I'll paraphrase it. He says, "Farewell, my friend. Say, be good to your family and do what you can for white folk, black folk, red folk, brown folk. Do what you can for all of mankind." And so I end now by saying thank you. Danke. Kamsahamnida. Thank you for inviting me to be the presenter on this very special occasion. And I say to each and every one of you, whatever your course has been in life and whatever it shall be, to God be the glory. Amen.
Somehow, to say thank you is not nearly enough. Thank you for sharing that history. Thank you for sharing so much of yourself and to maintain your emotion. I'm not sure how you did that, but I wanted to bring something to the attention of the audience as well. There was another parallel with you and Dr. King, both affiliated with the church by the name of Ebenezer. So what a coincidence that is. And I had to just really focus and understand that, this Ebenezer is in Selma, and it's not the Atlanta Ebenezer, but just you were mentioning those parallels, the two of you pastoring churches by the name of Ebenezer Baptist Church. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Another thing I wanted to bring up is when you mentioned that Dr. King was concerned about African Americans drinking from the cup of bitterness after the Voting Rights Act was passed. And Nelson Mandela had the same fear after apartheid. He wanted to make sure that the South Africans, the black South Africans, did not drink from a similar cup. So their lives and their philosophies and theories and feelings were certainly, without even mentioning, were certainly parallel. Such a heavy, wonderful morning. It just made us all think. It brought up a lot of emotion. It stirred up a lot of thought. And again, thank you. And that just doesn't seem to be enough. I know it in like 5 different languages, and I'll say it in 5 different languages just to create the emphasis as to how I think I can speak for everyone here, that we are so grateful to have had you here this morning. You preached it, you spoke it. And for those of you who didn't feel it before, I know everybody in this room feels it now, because I was watching everyone, and even if you didn't even understand what was going on or what has been going on, you understood this man's passion and his love for people, as we all should have, as he indicated as he wrapped up his speech. I'm going to push forward now. We have a young lady who is here who's going to guide us in a community pledge. You're going to meet Deshauna Edwards, a student at Spring Valley Academy. Deshauna?
I have not always valued people who are different. I pledge to honor the dignity and inherent worth of every human being. I have not always practiced compassion for people. I pledge to uphold injustice, not people. I have sometimes been more concerned about my rights than the rights of others. I pledge to dedicate myself, use my talents to empower others as I empower myself. I have not always stood up against injustice or denounced violence. I pledge to consciously practice peace on a daily basis. I have sometimes been reluctant to embrace differences and appreciate the value of every human being. I pledge to treat each person that I meet with courtesy, respect, and fairness.
Let us go from this place inspired and encouraged, with dreams of justice and love dancing in our heads. Let us live our pledge so that wherever dark clouds of prejudice and injustice are found, and whenever the deep fog of misunderstanding and fear drenches our community, that will be the ones who know how to rise up, shining like the sun, armed not with violence, anger, and hate, but armed only with the will to work for justice, to act lovingly toward our neighbor, to seek reconciliation, and to practice the golden rule. Martin Luther King Jr. has shown us a better way. We honor him best by showing that better way through our lives now. At this particular time, in this place that we call home and community, let us go now in peace and with courage. Amen.